Welcome to this episode of Rooted Recovery Stories. My name's Patrick Custer. I'm your host and so excited that each and every one of you have joined with us today. I am thrilled to introduce to you our guest. She's not only an author, she's a creator of so many wonderful things that have brought about and continue to bring about change in other people, positive change in other people's lives. The CEO and founder of Soul Recovery. Her remarkable story of addiction recovery has also been featured on the Oprah Winfrey Network, among so many other things. And I guess lastly, I'd like to mention that she is a trauma specialist, and that is a common thread woven through so much of her work we're going to be talking about today. Ester Nicholson, I'm so happy to have you here on the show.
It's so wonderful to be here, Patrick. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I really want to start with your story, because if Oprah got to have you on her, I want to dive in. I want to dive in first and hear all about it. I mean, chronologically, that's where so much of the, so much of the foundation and drive for your passion and what you're doing today has come from.
Absolutely.
So yeah, where did things begin for you?
Well, first of all, I'd like to share with the wonderful audience that I'm a woman in long-term recovery, 36 years of recovery, to be exact. And where my story started was I can remember a time in my life when I knew who I was, when I wasn't self-conscious, when I behaved the way I wanted to, when I didn't think about what others thought of me. Mm-hmm. I'm a singer, and when I would just sing and dance, that saying, sing as if nobody's listening and dance as if no one's watching. And I remember a time in my existence when I was that. And I refer to that time as, or that aspect of myself as, the authentic self. Mm-hmm. And then I wasn't. And then shock after shock after shock of being treated a certain way. Mm-hmm. The bullying in school. I remember the first time I was bullied in school, and I was like, it was in kindergarten, and I was like, what? It was like, it was a shock to my system, and that's what trauma does. Yeah. Is it shocks you out of your connection with your real self, right? And then, shock after shock, and then my mother, once I became of age to have my own opinion, and I wasn't a baby anymore, her attitude and actions changed toward me as well. And she became extremely abusive. Oh, wow. So I was born, I used to say that I was born into a dysfunctional family, but now I know I was born into an unhealed, traumatized family, because that's what dysfunction is. Yeah. And being born into that, it took me a while to become indoctrinated or for that trauma to infiltrate my consciousness to cause me to forget who I was. And then the bullying in school and the feelings of not belonging. My dad was a minister, and my dad adored me, thank God. But he was very strict, and that was a part of the bullying in school of, being a minister's kid and,
Sure.
not being able to hang out and party and not being considered cool at all. I was, and I would die to be cool.
Right.
And I remember, the first time I was offered a joint, and I eagerly accepted it.
How old were you?
I was like 14.
Yeah.
And it's not because I wanted the joint or I wanted to get high, because at that juncture, I didn't know what getting high was. Mm-hmm. But I was already addicted to the sense of needing to belong. That if I need to smoke this joint or jump off of a bridge to belong to this group of kids, that would validate me and tell me that I was enough and that I was okay because I belonged, then I would look at that. I now look at that as like one of my first addictions.
You know what makes so much sense to me there, and it's so ironic. I was having this conversation with somebody yesterday. We were just going down memory lane of all the dumb things that were fads over the last 10, 15 years. And one of them being Tide Pods. Do you remember the kids eating Tide Pods?
No.
So this was a fad. And so many of us in the addiction field were baffled because, especially, in recovery, going, well, I remember when I first heard it, I said, so like, do you get a buzz? What does it do for your brain? Why on earth would they be doing this? Nobody ever had an answer. And it wasn't until, I was talking to somebody yesterday who, a therapist friend of mine, and they said, Patrick, no, it makes all the sense in the world. For whatever reason, something started and kids started eating these Tide Pods, and they did it because they got a dopamine rush when they felt a sense of coolness and connection.
That's right.
It didn't matter if they got a chemical,
right.
A chemical rush from like a drug. They're getting a natural chemical rush from the feeling of being accepted,
which is just as addictive.
Yes. And so I know this is so like, it feels a little bit off topic, but it's so on topic of what you're mentioning here. And I think that, gosh, so many of us can relate to one or many points of our lives where we would have put ourselves in harm's way and all sorts of, or did put ourselves in harm's way just to feel accepted and connected in connection with other people.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's, that was my first experience with drugs, but it was really an experience of just really seeing how desperate I was to belong, especially as one of those kids who felt left out and was the last one picked on the volleyball team, or in gym, or I did go to jail too, but that's a whole nother story.
I'm part of that club. It's okay.
So again, just needing that sense of belonging, and also remembering when I went from this sense of fearlessness to just being scared all the time. I was afraid to sleep by myself. I was afraid to sleep with the lights off. I was afraid to sleep without any noise. I was afraid all day long. I was afraid to go to the bus stop because I knew I was going to be picked on. I was afraid to go to school because I knew I was going to be picked on. I was afraid to be at home because I knew my mother was going to find something to yell at me about or beat me about. I was just afraid. And what happened, what I know now, is that I took on this false sense of identity. That became my identity. That became my normal.
Being a victim?
Being scared. Like I didn't know I couldn't remember who I was. I couldn't remember the other aspect of me that didn't know fear, that wasn't afraid. Yeah. So a part of my work is returning to the authentic self, that part of you that isn't afraid, because you're created in safety, and you don't have to be enough. You were created enough, right? So I was just afraid all the time and trying to prove myself all the time and trying to belong all the time. And so I was given that first joint, and I would get high, and I didn't even enjoy it. I didn't even enjoy marijuana. It made me so paranoid. I was afraid to cross the street.
I never did either. I couldn't. I tried many times to enjoy it. That one wasn't meant for me.
Yeah, that wasn't my thing. I would smoke a joint and cry and laugh and eat and go to sleep. Like that was my thing. And then, as I was sharing with you earlier before we started recording, I'm from New York, and I left New York and went to Los Angeles, and I was introduced to cocaine.
How old were you when you went to Los Angeles?
19.
Okay. So very...
And by then I'd had my daughter.
Oh, wow.
So I'm a minister's daughter who got pregnant at 16 years old. And we understand what all of that is about, that the more restrictions I had on me, the more I wanted to belong.
Right.
The more I wanted this outside validation, and without any education about sex or my body at all, I just wanted this boy to like me, and my best friend told me it was okay. And I got pregnant, which was a very traumatic time.
Sure. I can only imagine, as my husband is a preacher's kid too. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I love my parents-in-law, and I grew up in the church. I've got lots of friends whose parents are pastors as well. And so I'm just, I'm super familiar with what they call the PK, the preacher's kid phenomenon, not my own personal experience, but there's a lot of pressure. And so, not knowing necessarily your denomination or whatnot, but how was that received from your parents and, outward towards the congregation? Was there a narrative that...
Oh, absolutely. But one of the things that I am so blessed and so lucky to have had was an amazing father. Mm. And it just seems like such... so confusing, because I had such an abusive mother who I now know was so traumatized and so sick, and she projected that onto me, and I've done a lot of work around that. Mm-hmm. And I had a father who adored me and who was a great father, and for a long time I blamed him for not protecting me from her. Mm. And digging into that, really getting clear that at that particular time in life, ministers didn't leave their wives, right, and didn't leave the church and didn't break up the family. Mm-hmm. And that a lot of his silence actually had to do with protecting me, with because when I leave to go speak or to go minister, it's going to make it worse for her. So, I really have been able to shift my perspective about my father, which has been amazing, an amazing spiritual and emotional shift around that. But my father, it was actually kind of funny, but this was the narrative. He was like, you know what? I'm not proud of what you did, but we love you. I love you. And we're going to take care of the baby, and it's going to be okay. Mm. You can't sing in the choir. You can't sing in the choir, though. But it's going to be okay. Mm. But of course, there were whispers in the church, and right, just all of that, just all of that energy around that.
Oh, yeah.
And then, of course, me being a 16-year-old girl who wasn't trying to get pregnant.
Yeah.
I was just trying to belong.
Yeah.
And so at 19 years old, I moved to Los Angeles, and I was introduced to cocaine. And at first, it started off as like every weekend after work. Mm-hmm. And then someone introduced me to freebasing. That's before it turned into crack, which to me, it doesn't make any difference, right?
Yeah.
And the next thing I knew, I was so addicted, and I kept promising myself that this was going to be the last time. And I meant it from the bottom of my heart, and I'd break another pipe. And
like on purpose,
like
to
on
say
purpose,
I'm done.
Throw it up in the tree. Like, yeah, I'm done. I'm really done. And that phenomenon of craving would come over me like out of the blue. Usually on payday, right? Usually on payday. And it got to the point where, I could look in the mirror and I could literally see my skeleton. I had lost that much weight, and I really lost my dignity on the unforgiving streets of South Central Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And anyone who understands addiction knows exactly what I'm talking about. I left my daughter at home alone many times, to the point of where my family had to come and get her. And I was so grateful that they came to get her, not only because now I could get loaded freely, right, without feeling guilty, but I knew that I was putting her in grave danger. And I had no idea when I was going to ever be able to stop. So as long as I'm in this, she needs to be away from that. So I was grateful that they came to get her. And I'd hit a bottom to the point of I tried the anonymous programs. I tried Cocaine Anonymous, I tried Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'd even made some friends there.
Mm-hmm.
And, I would put together 3 days, 5 days, a week, 2 weeks. And then I found myself like standing up every 5 days as a newcomer again. And one of the last times that happened, I'd strung together along a week or so. And I was at home, and all of a sudden, bam, it talks about that peculiar mental twist,
Mm-hmm.
right? That mental blank spot that, everything's going okay. I was working. I hadn't gotten high for a couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I was attending my meetings. I had some friends in the program, and bam, out of seemingly nowhere, this phenomenon of craving came over me. And it was so powerful that I couldn't take the time to put my shoes on. So I ran out of my house without any shoes on, and I hail a taxi to take me to the neighborhood where the drug dealer lived.
Mm-hmm.
So I get into the taxi and I say, Dunsmuir and Pico. I have no shoes on. I got to get it. I got to have it right now.
It's all you can think about.
Right.
Yep.
And this taxi turns to face me in the back seat. And he says to me, young lady, please don't kill yourself today.
Mm.
Now, I tell people that wasn't the miracle moment. I'd heard that many times from my family, from people in the program,
Yeah.
from my daughter, who was only 7 years old at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Please don't do this again. But something happened in that moment. And people ask me, was that your bottom? And I say, I think that was the tip of the iceberg of a culmination of bottoms.
Mm-hmm.
It was a spiritual experience. Because when he looked me in my eyes and he said that, it was like a veil that had been covering my consciousness parted. And the fog lifted. And I saw that little girl who wasn't afraid. I saw and I felt that little girl who was enough just because she was. I saw and felt that little girl who didn't know about worthiness because she didn't know anything about unworthiness. I was free for it seemed like minutes, but it was probably like just a couple of seconds. I had returned home. Like it had been shown to me who I was. And then the veil closed again.
Yep.
And when it closed, I knew intuitively that if I would have continued to the drug dealer's house,
Mm-hmm.
I was going to die that day. I knew it as clear as day, or I could get out of the cab and live. And I said, thank you very much. And I got out of the cab and I went inside my house and I called one of my friends in the program and I said, I'm going to die. I knew it. You got to help me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I was introduced to this group who were participating in a 12-step process. In the 12 steps, they were taking the steps off the wall and meeting as a group, 12 people for 12 weeks. And I was invited to be a part of and they were getting ready to close this group. Like I was the 12th one.
Wow.
Right?
This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health. If you or a loved one are struggling with trauma, addiction, or mental health, we are ready to answer your questions and help you take that next step. Call our admissions center at 888-648-4098 or visit us online at www.promises.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.
And it was in this group, I remember it was the first time, as many meetings as I had gone to, it was the first time that I understood step one. It was the first time that step came alive for me, that I was so powerless and that my life was unmanageable. I really, it came alive for me. And then I continued on with the steps and I became very committed because once I really had a spiritual experience of that first step, I was already changed. I was already being transformed. And I remember in this group, when we took the third step together, actually have an experience of the presence of God. And I was gone. It was like, okay, that's it for me. And just becoming more and more committed and convicted about the 12 steps. And people confuse the spiritual, the foundational principles of the 12 steps with the rooms. The principles of the steps have, they're a part of the program, but the principles of the 12 steps are ancient wisdom.
Yeah.
Right? If you take them out of the context of Alcoholics Anonymous or any of the anonymous groups, these steps are based in ancient wisdom, right? And they are transformative.
Yeah.
And they transformed me to the degree where I was able to get a life. I was able to get my daughter back. I was able to maintain a job and a place to live. But then there came a time after 10 years, now we're at 10 years of recovery, there came a time when the steps stopped working for me. And I thought that it was the steps that had stopped working for me. But what was really happening was that the unhealed trauma that was so deeply embedded in my consciousness, without enlarging my spiritual life and without going deeper, that the way I was practicing the steps from the same place I was practicing them when I had first started were no longer effective. It's like going to the gym, right?
Yeah.
And doing the same workout in the same exact way that you did 5 years ago. Your body is screaming to grow and to get stronger, and you're using weights that are kind of useless now, right? So that was the beginning of my recovery process. And then I did get involved with metaphysical teachings and ancient wisdom and other transformational modalities to really help me to address the deep pain that I was walking around with. Can
I ask you really quick? This is a question that I get really curious with people in their recovery stories about. In those early 0 to 10 years of your recovery, do you remember the point with which you realized that you wanted, right? Like you weren't just doing this because you had no choice, right? Because there's that initial period, many of us, myself included, it's like we're the gift is desperation is what brought us in. And then there's this transition where you hop over into I've found joy and I'm doing this because I want to. Do you remember a specific time where you found just the love for a sober, recovering life?
There wasn't a time where I would specifically have named it as I have a choice and I choose joy and I choose recovery. I do remember the moment when I realized I wouldn't get high or go back to who I used to be, even if I could. And that's what transformation is. You're just not the person that you used to be. So I remember that, which is probably the same thing that you're talking about.
Yeah. Just worded a little bit differently, but yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
You're the first person to ever describe, in your own words that I've heard, something that I talk about in my own story as well, which is, and I'm not really great at putting it into words, but I know that there was this point where I reached that I realized, within the first few years after getting sober, that I all of a sudden was aware. I was feeling good. I was feeling joy and a sense of well-being that I hadn't felt since before I started drinking and using. And I didn't start drinking and using and immediately go to a addiction phase, right? Like, it was recreational at first and it wasn't all whatever, but it hadn't been since before the very first part for me that I remembered feeling this certain way. And then I had this awareness a few years in, thinking, just how you described it. All of a sudden, I had this joy. I had done work, didn't realize that all this work I had been doing led me to this place where I was all of a sudden able to experience what I didn't even realize it had been so many years that I had the lack thereof. So I love that we're talking about this, because I haven't ever in normal and regular life or on this show ever talked to anybody who has described it the way you have as well. So I'm really excited to dive further into this part of your story, because I know that's where we're going. So you're working through or identifying that there's transition happening, there's a lack. What did you do next in this transformative work?
What I love about our souls is that it's on schedule.
Ooh, I love that. Can you say that again?
What I love about our souls is that it's on schedule. Our egoic minds will make us think that we're too late, that we're not doing enough, that it's not enough, and I need to hurry up and do it. And it's just the noise, and it's just trying to protect you, but it's a little crazy, and it's wounded, right? And whenever I surrender that and just really touch that place within me, and then I just kind of watch my life unfold, it's like, that was right on time. That was right on time. That was right on. Wow, I'm right on time. What was I worried about? And I go through that so many times. It's like, there you go. It's like, what were you worried about?
Yeah.
Right? So after 10 years of being in the program, going to meetings and all of that, I found myself feeling restless, irritable, and discontented with the program. The steps, the steps were not giving me the high, the transformational experience that it had initially given me. And I wasn't trying to get high ever again, but I was sad and scared, and I didn't have any tools to address my emotions. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And one of the ladies...
We're so hardwired once we start working on ourselves to do work that when stagnation comes for any reason, even if you're doing work,
we can get addicted to doing the work. We can get addicted to working.
Exactly.
And struggling.
And so if you're not like, where's my result? Like, because in the initial years, you're doing the work, you're going through the steps, you're seeing so much result because there's so much work to be done to get to baseline. I think so many of us can identify. Once you get to that baseline place of health,
you don't know how to be.
You don't know how to be. And then there's all the other stuff that has nothing to do with your alcoholism.
Alcoholism and the drug addiction and the food addiction and the min addiction and all of that they are symptoms of this other stuff that you never got to, right? But it's time to get to them now, right? So, and it still wasn't quite time for me to get to them then. It was time for me to go to another level. It was time for another layer of my recovery to be addressed, which was I had so many spiritual experiences, but in my mind, intellectually, God was still outside of myself. My higher power was still outside of myself and maybe going to kick me down some good if I was like perfect enough. You know what I'm saying? So I still had this misunderstanding. I still had the understanding of my upbringing, right?
Performance-based
performance-based grace. I like that.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, I can relate.
Right.
Yeah.
So when I became involved, so one of the ladies that I sponsored said, Esther, I really need you to come to my spiritual center because the way you speak and the way you are, I think that you would really resonate with this. And so I went, and the way they talked about that, the presence of higher power, the presence of life, the presence of love, the presence of Allah, the presence of Yahweh, the presence of Jehovah, the presence of God, whatever it is that you want to call it, is not outside of you, but it is actually you. It is actually the highest version of you, and you are created out of it, right? And you are perfect, whole, and complete, and you were created out of this energy field, this force field of such love, and you are so loved unconditionally. And it's like, I never heard that before. I never heard that before. And that it's done unto you as you believe. And look at what you believe about yourself, which matches what you continue to create.
That's right.
Right? And that this presence that we call higher power, that we call God, it only sees you as enough, as worthy, as amazing, but the laws of the universe can only reflect back to you what you believe you are. You following me?
Oh, I'm so following you.
Right?
Yes.
So I'm like, whoa, well, when I just think about my unchecked consciousness and all the thoughts that go through my consciousness on a daily basis, they're pretty dark. They're pretty negative about what's going to happen to me, what people are going to do to me, all of that kind of stuff.
On top, just to tag on to that, our community and those closest around us pick up off of that as well. They learn how to treat us and behave around us and what box to put us in based on that belief system. Based
on the box you've put yourself in.
Yeah.
Always. And to know that's like, oh my God, like the power was never outside of me. And you know how people say, I've given my power away. I have to give my power back, get my power back. I learned that you don't have the power to give away your power, but you do have the power to forget your power.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Because you are the power in expression. It's your birthright. It's your true identity. So when I became involved in these teachings and learned how to pray and how to meditate, not from a place of trying to get something, but from a place of seeking to align with that which already is, I was like, and then started working the steps from that place.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is soul recovery.
Yeah.
Oh, but even though soul recovery addresses our external addictions to drugs, to alcohol, to food, to sex, to whatever, soul recovery is really based on the premise of recovering, rediscovering, and reawakening to who you were created to be before it was numbed out by trauma and indoctrinated false beliefs of others. Recovery is, the definition of recovery is to recover something that has been misplaced.
And for so many of us, that started at a very young age.
That's right. We misplaced ourselves.
I know. I can remember when the last time I told my story, somebody asked me, when do you, let's not just talk about your alcoholism. When did your first medicating behavior start? I'm like, well, crap.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, overeating. I'm from the South. My family,
look how we
food.
Medicated on sugar immediately, right?
Yeah. And mine was straight from, just trying to keep this on topic, but just so I can relate to what you're talking about. I had an overwhelming specific fear that started for myself when I was like 5, 5, 6, 7, 8. And food was my medicator and, other medicators came after. And so, it just makes what you're saying makes absolutely so much sense, because as we go on through this path of life and we find other things that give us a sense of ease and comfort, or change, lift our mood or change the way we feel, we're going to use them.
Right. We are addicted to avoidance. We're addicted to distraction. Because,
that's a big one. I think everybody can relate to right now.
If you're powerless over these emotions that are the drivers of your moods and your actions, and you're powerless over them, you feel powerless over them, right? Then I need to be distracted so I don't even have to deal with them.
So emotional dysregulation is the problem, and distraction is the solution. If we're talking about
it's definitely one of the symptoms.
Yes.
And there's healthy distraction,
yeah,
which is wonderful, and we should all have it, right? And then there's the distraction that turns into an obsession where you're just in it. You're just in the loop, whether that's social media, whether that's movies, whether that's food, whether that's, whatever it is, whenever I'm in the loop, and I still go in the loop at 36 years of recovery, right? It's just that I notice it now, and I know how to be with myself now. I know how to have grace for myself, and I know how to have compassion for myself. I call myself Boo. It's like, Boo, what's going on, Boo?
Yeah.
And then I do my work.
What you just described, I was in a meeting recently, and we did a topic about, I forget the full thing at the top, but we were reading through a passage of the Big Book where it talks about we will know a new freedom, we will know happiness, and we will know peace. And that simple phrase of we will know happiness. If you had asked me, what does that mean in early recovery? I would have been like, well, that means you're happy. That means you have this euphoric sense of joy all the time, and whatever. And that's simply not the case. And it's not meant to be the case.
And it's not about acquiring things.
Right.
Right.
It may be a cloudy day, but I know the sun is still up above the clouds, and there are sunny days to come. So when we talk about knowing happiness, like what you were just referencing, like, that just knowing, the experiencing is being anchored in getting to experience it, but knowing that there's ebbs and flows. We have a toolbox to handle the lows, and the awareness to know that this too shall pass.
I love this hymn called, and you probably know it, called "It Is Well With My Soul."
Oh my gosh!
Right, and so
yes,
when I'm in that place, and even after I've done my work, and I'm still in that place, that's a place where I call just rock the baby. Just rock the baby. Just be with the baby. She doesn't want you to try to fix her anymore. She doesn't want you to try to pray this away anymore. And my two prayers are, I need do nothing, and it is well with my soul. And that gets me through until it's like, oh, I've returned. She's returned.
Yeah. Oh, I think we could all use that. Yeah. We could all use that. What was the phrase again? I'd never want to lose that, what you said. The soul is always...
The soul is on schedule.
The soul is on schedule.
A teacher once told me, because I was like, I need this and I need this. And she's like, sweetheart, there's no urgency in God. And it's like, that was like, what? There's no urgency in God? Really? I was like, whoa, that makes sense. There's no urgency in God. There's no urgency in your soul. It's unfolding perfectly.
Yeah. I think there's this sense for so many of us, especially, oh my gosh, the younger generations right now, to feel so the comparison, the social media, the race of becoming something, becoming someone, doing, accolades,
it's
all the things. It's so
not true.
There's so many perceived pressures of what need to happen in order for someone to have their value and worth not only be felt by themselves, but to be reinforced by other people.
You know what the number one addiction is? Well, the number one addiction is the belief that you're separate and apart from God, your soul. That's the number one addiction. But the number two addiction is to approval.
I believe that.
If we all could release in this moment wanting anybody's approval, even your own approval, because when you think about what it takes for you to approve of yourself, and you think about how distorted it is, right?
Yeah.
So if we could release even wanting our own approval,
Yeah.
I mean, just feel the freedom in that. Just feel the weight that comes off of you and releasing want. And when I say wanting, because energetically, what we say we want, we're actually saying that we don't have. And so then that's what we keep manifesting, is that you don't have it. When actually you were created out of approval. So it's not that you're not going to have approval, but could you release wanting it and just feel all that pressure and that weight just fall from you, and then you're yourself again.
Oh, that's beautiful. So this didn't come overnight. You have laid out a lot of wonderful, beautiful, deep, rich pieces of, I mean, like I could go through, and I'm going to go through, because we always do with these, I'm going to go through and watch this over again and piece apart this. This is some deep work you've done, and some really great phrasing that has deep spiritual meaning, that you've just mentioned. It didn't happen overnight. You shared about kind of launching into this work. What was the trajectory from you're 10 years sober? What happened next to launch you into this career moving forward, that's brought you forward to today?
Well, I was at 10 years sober. I was invited to sing as a background vocalist to go on tour with Rod Stewart and Bette Midler.
Wow.
And so I want to say, because of the emotional addictions to unworthiness and never belonging and not enough, and that was like the next phase to really look at in my recovery, that even after having these amazing experiences, I never felt like I belonged there. I couldn't even allow myself to enjoy it, because and that's what we do when we're addicted to those illusions of separation and not enoughness, is that even when the good stuff comes, we can't enjoy it, or we'll sabotage it. And we don't even know how it got sabotaged, but you actually created it, the sabotage.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And so I was with Rod Stewart. I'd been with him for 5 years. And like the last 2 years, I call it the divine impulse. It's your soul saying, boo, it's time to grow.
Yeah.
Like you've outgrown this, but you're trying to hold on. You're either trying to hold on to your old vision that worked at a particular time, or you're trying to hold on to somebody else's vision, right? So I was trying to hold on to my old vision of being a background vocalist at this level, and traveling the world and hanging out in Rod Stewart's manifested vision, right? But after 3 years of being with that divine impulse is that feeling of restlessness, of this isn't satisfying to me anymore. I'm other than this. And then the thought came, you're a teacher, you're a spiritual practitioner, you're an author, you're a presenter. And my ego said, no, I'm scared. And I tell people, it's like the thing that I was most terrified of is like, I'm doing all of that right now. So that just goes to show you that your fears are not based in truth, right?
Oh, heck yeah.
But I ignored the divine impulse because I was like, this is my security. And I got fired. And I tell people, I am so grateful for every job that ever fired me and every man who ever left me, right? Because they did for me what I couldn't do for myself.
Yeah.
And what appeared to be betrayal or abandonment was actually your soul giving you the message that it was time for you to move on. But that was the only way your ego could receive the message.
Okay. I know.
Can I get an amen?
Amen. And can you repeat that? Because that was it was simple but complex, and it's so good. Okay. So can you repeat that part just one more time?
I was channeling, so I have no idea what I just said. But what I said was, I was grateful for every man who ever left me and every job that ever fired me, because it was my soul doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. And what the ego looks at as the rug was pulled out from under me, abandonment, betrayal. Actually, your higher power, your soul has nothing to do with that. It doesn't even know anything about that. But that was the only way your particular ego could get the message that it was time to move on.
Yes, that was it.
And now I choose to get my messages through grace and through vision and through self-love, that I don't have to be on the floor in the fetal position anymore to get to go to my next. And that is a result of self-love that took a long time to get to.
How many of us are in the chains and shackles bondage of only changing when fear motivates us because we get to that point of the fetal position,
right?
Figuratively.
Right.
I mean, I think that more often than not, most people, whether they are willing to admit it, whether they suffer with addiction tendencies or not,
that they have to hit a bottom.
There's a bottom, and it's based in fear that they have to get to before change happens. And I shouldn't say they, because I include myself in that. People ask me, well, what's on your bucket list to do? I could say, one of my biggest things is not like places to go, anything like that. Is I always say, I would love to get to a place where the majority of my lessons that I learn and the change that happens in my life is born from goodness, joy, hope, faith, all of the positive things. Inspiration, rather than out of fear and
I have no choice.
Yes.
And exhaustion.
Yep. And so I love how beautifully you just put that, because that is if that's my number one bucket list item.
And the fact that you are even in the consciousness, at the level of consciousness, to desire that indicates where you are and the growth that you've gone through, that you know now that there's this energy that you can grow from and grow out of, versus being beaten up and going through that kind of struggle. I mean, God, that's radical self-love, and it takes what it takes to finally get there. I have, in one of my presentations, it's a talk called The Divine Invitation. And there's the ivory invitation that gives you that nudge, that feeling of restlessness, or that feeling of you'll get that vision of something else, and you'll shut it down. It's like, oh, I can't do that. That's too big for me, or that's too much for me. And you don't listen. Then comes the pink invitation, which things are starting to get a little unmanageable. Things are starting to get a little hard.
Yeah.
And you're starting to get a little wigged out, right? But you're like, you still have it under control, and you still don't listen. Then comes the red invitation, which appears to be the dark night of the soul, which appears to be that the rug has just been pulled out from under you. And it feels that way, and I know it feels that way. I know it feels like things will never be okay ever again. But if you do the work and you come home to your authentic self, things will be okay again. They're going to be better than ever, actually. And then you come to a place of, I don't want to have to do it that way again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see how that has got to have helped so many people, and like being able to put this together in a fashion that you're able to talk about it and transmit it to other people, in a book, in your words, and regularly, is such a gift. How did you get to the point where the door opened for you to be, to write the book, to start telling your story publicly?
Oh, okay. So when Rod Stewart fired me, and I was on the floor in the fetal position for about 6 months, blaming him, blaming the world, how could this have happened to me? And then, of course, doing my work and having a spiritual awakening that this was actually a gift. And my manager said to me, you need to write a book. And I was like, no, I want to be Beyonce. And he's like, no. He's like, no, you need to write a book. And so I had this amazing being, this amazing man who's my best friend and was my manager for a lot of years. and who held my hand. And it took me 4 years to write the book because I procrastinated for so long.
Oh, I can't relate to that.
But then when
I'm kidding.
but like I said, the soul is on schedule.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't really procrastinating. I was preparing.
Oh.
Because when it was time for me to write the book, it was done in 4 months. I was up at 5 o'clock every morning and it was done in 4 months. The editing, the graphics, everything was done. Right. And I started speaking at churches and introducing to spiritual centers and churches the concept that addiction is so much deeper than what you might be aware of it as being. That an addiction is when you are so attached to a belief system or a thought pattern or behavior pattern that you become enslaved or in bondage to it. And it might outpicture or manifest as drugs and alcohol, or it might manifest as whatever it is that's going on in your own home, in your mind every day, in your work environment every day, in your emotions every day. You're addicted to your anxiety. You're addicted to to your feelings of depression and victimhood. You're addicted to feeling unworthy and not good enough. And I asked the church, can I get an amen? And they're like, amen.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and you're praying every day and you're coming to church and you're doing everything that you're being told that you should do, but you're still suffering because there's an aspect of yourself that you're not addressing. Right?
Yeah.
And so you're being asked to do the work to recover your soul by incorporating the 12 steps of recovery with the other spiritual work that you're doing. And that is going to bring you home. So I started off introducing the 12 steps to spiritual centers and churches and saying, let's look at addiction in a different way, right?
Yes.
And then, of course, bringing this to the behavioral healthcare industry, where I'm like, wow, wouldn't it be powerful when people first enter recovery to remind them that you may have been born into dysfunction, but you were created out of greatness, and that it's not your fault, and you're not unworthy, and you're not good enough, and you've always belonged, but you have forgotten. You're just here to remember who you are, and how wonderful that could be presented or introduced to them in the very beginning of their recovery. Yeah. To start them from that process. Right? So that's how I started speaking on soul recovery. And of course, having my own private client practice where we use the soul recovery principles. And also, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, the emotional freedom technique.
Oh, yeah.
EFT. So we use, people are reading their 5th step to me and it's like, we're tapping. It's like, you don't have to wait until the 9th step to have a spiritual experience. We could start healing this trauma right now.
Yes. Tapping is something that helped me through some of my darkest time in sobriety.
Me too.
When I didn't know any other way to ground myself.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah.
What's the best resource you would say give to somebody that has no idea about tapping?
Definitely go to my website at soulrecovery.org. Also, you can look up tapping. Nick Ortner is not the creator of tapping, but he's a well-known expert in tapping. And there's all kinds of free tapping videos on Google where, he takes you through the points. You can even download the app for tapping on anxiety, tapping on insomnia, tapping, there's an app for everything to tap on that will bring you from the intensity and the pain of a 10 to a 0, which changes your brain, which changes your brain, which calms down your nervous system and gives your brain the opportunity to see things differently than your conditioned way of seeing them. And then when you can see things differently and incorporate that into your belief system, then now you're believing something higher, and now you're creating something higher.
It puts you back in the driver's seat.
It puts you back in the driver's seat.
Oh, I love
that. And that incorporated with the steps and affirmative dialogue, which we can call that affirmative prayer, but affirmative dialogue and aligning through affirmative dialogue and self-compassion and wonderful, yummy inner child work.
Yes.
It's like you're going to return to who you really are, not who you've been conditioned to be, but who you really are.
Yeah. It is so apparent, the work that you've done, just talking to you and getting to know you, hearing your story, and the work that you've done, and all that you've put into your book, your relaying of information. So much of what you've said is just, it's palatable in a way that I haven't heard it before, right? It may not be new information, but I'm able to digest it in a way that I feel like, oh, I can use this, right? So I'm so grateful I'm so grateful for everything that led you on your path to be here today, but even if it's just for me, selfishly. But if you're, those of you who are watching, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you are part of this episode, because everybody's going to get something out of this. And so far we've talked about so many great things that are transformational possibilities, no matter who you are or what you've gone through or what you've struggled with. But the last big thing that I really want to talk about that you have done so much work around is healing unconscious racial bias.
Absolutely. So that has become such a huge deal in my life, and I have become one of the conduits of this amazing healing and teaching. And it started about 2 years. No, I'm sorry. It started right after the murder of George Floyd. And I am a part of an organization called She Recovers.
Love She Recovers.
Yes.
Dawn Nichols.
Dawn, one of my dearest friends.
Yeah. Is it Nichols or Nicholson?
Nichols.
Nichols. Yeah.
Yeah. So Dawn and the She Recovers leadership team became so committed to healing systemic racism and racial bias in the recovery community. And they started looking at that within their own community. Like, wow, this is a predominantly white community, and we haven't done a lot to make Black, Indigenous, and women of color feel welcomed, and we don't know how to. And so I became a part of their DEIB committee and did a summit on critical conversations between white women and Black women, and did a healing session on that. And then Dawn introduced me to the National Association of Treatment Providers, and I became a part of their DEIB committee. And in our meetings, I was listening to the ideas and the inspiration and all of the ways in which NATAP, the National Association, wanted to eradicate systemic racism for marginalized communities, and all the work that they wanted to do around that. And I was listening to that, and I was like, that's great. And then Soul Recovery, but all of this information is wonderful. And all of these changes, all of these topical changes that we want to make, they're necessary, but information without transformation is not sustainable. And that and that even though racial bias is systemic, it is emotional and spiritual in nature. Because when we forgot who we were, we forgot that we were one with all people. And that racism is not a reality. Racism is a learned construct that was learned centuries and centuries and centuries ago, and that it's going to take more than, changing recruiting practices and all of that to heal this. And in fact, there are so many organizations that are mandating their staff and leadership to take DEIB trainings, and they're experiencing pushback and racism fatigue and feeling, so many people are feeling abused, accused, and, blamed and shamed for being white. And I'm like, I don't think that's the approach.
Right.
I don't think that's the approach that's going to open hearts that can actually really support us in making these changes before we've closed them down by accusing you and making you feel ashamed for being white. Okay, you do have white privilege, but do you need to be ashamed about that? Or is there another way to look at that can actually be helpful? Right? And so I'm like, there needs to be a healing in this part of the system that we're working out. We can't just go do DEIB trainings without having the fundamental, applying the fundamental healing principles to recover and rediscover who we really are, and to release the shame, to release the blaming, to release the talking at each other and being mad at each other, so that we're all healing our intergenerational trauma and all healing our racial bias. Because white people are not the only people who have racial bias. We all have racial bias, and this is not about being in denial, about the heinous, racial crimes that some white people have inflicted upon marginalized communities, but what compassionate accountability, which is the name of my training, compassionate accountability, healing unconscious racial bias, is about. It's not about being mad at all white people. It's about healing white supremacy, the consciousness, the consciousness of oppression and the consciousness of supremacy. That's what we're trying to heal, and racial trauma. And when we heal that, we can come into a consciousness of oneness, and then we're going to be led to the strategic DEIB trainings that's actually sustainable, because the people that are being mandated to take them now have created, and through the training has created an emotional pathway to be able to do that work without feeling like I'm bad and walking away feeling beaten up. It's like, that's not working.
Yeah.
So that's why I created compassionate accountability, which tactfully addresses the root causes of unconscious racial bias.
So I have a question as far as, now I know that you do these wonderful trainings for companies. Let's just say that, one of our viewers is going at home going, oh my gosh, I could really use some help with this. So not necessarily a training that they can go to whatever company or, doing your training. Is there some way that they can connect with that resource to learn?
Yes, absolutely. So individuals who want to take this training or be introduced to this training, you can go to TPN. That's T as in Tom, P as in Paul, N as in Nancy, .health. And there are on-demand videos of this training. I am being contracted by companies and organizations right now, but we are definitely, and in Nashville on July 21st, it's open to the public, where I'm doing a 6-hour training on this, sponsored by Integrative Life Network.
Yeah.
And we're, thinking of ways, Soul Recovery, my company, of, how can we get this out there publicly for people who are not affiliated with certain companies.
Yeah.
So we haven't figured that out yet.
Yeah. No, it's wonderful when you're part of a corporation that is so kind and responsible to saying, we want to invest in helping to heal, do our part, and that kind of thing. But I love that you're, looking at it from the perspective of just the average person too, that's wanting to, wanting to heal.
Absolutely.
I love something you said so much. Information without, what was it?
Without transformation is not sustainable. And isn't that the same thing? Isn't that how we look at recovery? That you could be doing, you could be going to meetings, you could be doing, other things, you could be abstaining from whatever it is that your addiction has been. But if you're not doing the deep emotional and spiritual work, it's not sustainable.
You're going to get miserable enough that you're going to go do put yourself back in harm's way.
And even if it's not the same addiction, and that's what people do, is they switch addictions. They're like, well, at least I'm not doing that. I'm like, yeah, but you're still enslaved. You're still in bondage.
Yep.
You're still not free.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
So
I think that as part of and I refer to our collective community as the healing community, because it's what we do, right? Like we're facilitators of healing. And, I just think that it's such a neat gift to be able to be a conduit in whatever part you or I or, anybody else plays in the behavioral health field, and being change agents of, in people's lives.
Yeah. And I believe in order to do that, and we're all effective at that, and whatever degree we're effective at that is wonderful. But we must do our own work.
Oh yeah.
Because we can't give what we don't have.
That's right.
Yeah.
I love that you've provided that resource. Are there any other, what was that website again that you said? NTP?
TPN.
TPN. Don't listen to me,
Treatment
y'all.
Providers Network. So it's tpn.com, and go to CE units or something like that, and it'll take you to my trainings. On compassionate accountability. But if you want, if compassionate accountability, healing unconscious racial bias isn't where you're directed or focused right now, and you're just like, I need something, I need to go to the next level. I have a 21-day return to the authentic self. That's 21 2-minute audio meditation clips with tapping videos.
Ooh,
with affirmative word, affirmative prayer that you do for 21 days.
Great.
And if you go to, I don't want to give you too many calls to action.
Sure. We're going to put them all in the show notes, but feel free to mention it here.
So if you go to Ester, Ester, mail.com and go, and it's really inexpensive right now because we're getting ready to go up on that. So you might want to get that today.
Awesome.
Yeah. And of course the book, Soul Recovery, you can get on Amazon.com.
Lovely. That was going to be my next question. All right. So to close it out, this is my favorite of all, and it puts everybody on the spot, but the soul is right on time. So I'm just going to appeal to your soul right now and ask, for that person that's identified with any or all or huge chunk of your story today, what final word of encouragement would you like to leave with them as we close out?
You are so much more than you have come to believe that you are, and that there's an aspect of you that is just dying to break through. The real you just wants to come through. And that's why you're probably feeling, this war within yourself, is because the real you is trying to get out, while the you that you have become is trying to stay safe by staying the same. And if you can just allow yourself to be so gentle with that part of yourself that's trying to stay the same, and relax into the you that's trying to come through. But you've got to do the work, sweetheart. You've got to do the work and be as consistent as you can, because if you don't do something different, then nothing can change. And that's just the real deal. Okay? So say yes to the real you, because that is just an amazing, powerful, beautiful being. I look forward to meeting you.
Lovely. I'm so glad to meet you and for us this wonderful time together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend.
Yeah.
It's been awesome.
Beautiful. And thank you to each of you for sticking with us through this episode. And it's been a treat for me. I know it's been a blessing to each of you. And I just want to finish out by reminding everybody that it is never too late to start loving yourself, and you're only ever one decision away from a completely different life.
Amen.
This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health. If you or a loved one are struggling with trauma, addiction, or mental health, we are ready to answer your questions and help you take that next step. Call our admission center at 888-648-4098 or visit us online at www.promises.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.